We now know the determinants of productivity. Now we are going to look at the ways public policy can affect long-run growth in productivity and living standards. Let's see the first one. First one is saving and investment. We can boost productivity by increasing capital, physical capital, which requires investment. Because capital is a produce factor of production, a society can change the amount of capital it has. If today the economy produces a large quantity of new capital goods, then tomorrow it will have a larger stock of capital and be able to produce more goods and services. Thus, one way to raise future productivity is to invest more current resources in the production of capital. But we should be careful because people face trade-off. We learned that in 10 Principles of Economics in Chapter 1. And this principle is especially important when considering the accumulation of capital. Because resources are scarce, devoting more resources to producing capital requires devoting fewer resources to producing goods and services for current consumption. So for society to invest more in capital, it must consume less and save more of its current income. And the growth that arises from capital accumulation is not a free lunch. And that it's not a free lunch because it requires that society sacrifice consumption of goods and services in the present to enjoy higher consumption in the future. So we can say that reducing consumption today will increase saving, and this increased saving can be used in production of capital goods today, and these capital goods in the future will be used in the production of more goods and services. Okay, so there is a trade-off between current consumption and future consumption. One important thing here, there is a relation between saving and investment, which we will talk in the next chapter and see how saving leads to investment and investment leads to more physical capital. And from that perspective, there is one important phenomena that we need to learn in saving and investment, which is diminishing returns. And later on, based on diminishing returns, we will talk about what is catch-up effect. But first, let's start with diminishing returns. The traditional view of the production process is that capital is subject to diminishing returns. What does that mean? As the stock of capital rises, the extra output produced from an additional unit of capital falls. In other words, when workers already have a large quantity of capital to use in producing goods and services, giving them an additional unit of capital increases their productivity only slightly. So let me give an example. Let's say you have a data entry job and you hire a labor and you give that labor one computer. As you know, the computer will help the labor to be productive, and the labor can maybe do 8 hours a day and do the data entry job. But you think that you want to increase the physical capital, so you give 2 computers. As you know, the second computer is not going to help the labor because we have only one labor, so the productivity is not going to increase. As you see, if the labor has enough capital, then increasing capital will increase the productivity very small amount. And if you continue to increase the physical capital, even productivity is not going to change after some point. This is a very important term in economics. We call it diminishing returns to capital. Here you can see on the graph, here as you see, Y over L is the productivity and K over L is the amount of physical capital per worker. When the labor doesn't have any capital, giving a physical capital like no computers, you give one computer, yes, productivity is going to jump, increase very rapidly. But then after a while, adding more capitals to a labor that already has capital is not going to change productivity too much. So at the end, we come to a conclusion. In the long run, the higher saving rate leads to a higher level of productivity and income, but not to higher growth in these variables. Okay, so saving rate, we know that we save because we want to increase the capital goods, right? Saving leads to investment, and investment increases the capital goods. But while you are saving, you are not going to consume more. You are going to devote less resources for consumer goods today. But this saving is good, but if you continue to save in the long run, as you see here, because of the diminishing returns, you will not see too much increase in the productivity. Okay. And the property of diminishing returns to capital has another important implication. Other things being equal, it's easier for a country to grow fast if it starts out relatively poor. Like, let's say now in this graph, think of that a country like in Nigeria, even labor over there uses very simple techniques to do farming. But let's say you invest and bring capital goods to Nigeria. As you expect, the labor's productivity will increase rapidly. So when the country, that is a poor country, starts investing in capital goods, you may see an increase in the productivity, rapid increase in the productivity. And this effect of initial conditions on subsequent growth is sometimes called the catch-up effect. In poor countries, workers lack even the most rudimentary tools and as a result have low productivity. Thus, small amounts of capital investment can substantially raise these workers' productivity. By contrast, workers in rich countries have large amounts of capital with which to work, and this partly explains their high productivity. Yet, with the amount of capital per worker already so high, additional capital investment has a relatively small effect on productivity. Okay, so this we call it as catch-up effect. We can see example history. Over 1960-1990, the US and South Korea devoted a similar share of GDP to investment, so you might expect they would have similar growth performance. But growth was more than 6% in Korea and only 2% in the US, so this can be explained by catch-up effect, okay? In 1960, physical capital per labor was far smaller in Korea than in the US, hence Korea grew faster than United States during these years. And the second important thing about physical capital, investment from abroad is actually enhances growth, productivity. So why that is the case? Let me give an example. Ford Motor Company might build a car factory in Mexico, and if Ford builds a car factory in Mexico, as you know, that car factory is going to hire more labor, and also it's going to produce output cars, which will, as you know, the GDP is the value of the goods and services produced in a year, which is the income of the country. It will increase because more cars are going to be produced. So as you see, foreign investment is very important for the countries, especially poor ones, because they don't have enough saving to do investment on capital goods, and they can find this investment from abroad. Okay, and also investment from abroad can be classified into two categories. Ford Motor Company building a car factory is called foreign direct investment, okay, because the company is owned and operated by a foreign entity. Alternatively, an American might buy stock in a Mexican corporation. The Mexican corporation can use the proceeds from the stock sale to build a new factory. So just buying stock shares is also financing investment in Mexico. An investment that is financed with foreign money but operated by domestic residents is called foreign portfolio investment. And in both cases, Americans provide the resources necessary to increase the stock of capital in Mexico. That is, American saving is being used to finance Mexican investment. And Americans are not doing this, investing foreign country because they are too much generous. They are also expecting a profit because they are making an investment and they expect a profit. For the example of Ford Company, Ford takes some of this additional income because they produce car, the Ford Company produce car, sells and gets some profit, and this some of this additional income goes back to United States in the form of profit. And similarly, when an American investor buys Mexican stock, the investor has a right to a portion of the profit that the Mexican corporation earns. And this investment from abroad is especially beneficial in poor countries because, as I said, these countries cannot generate enough saving to fund investment projects themselves. And one important thing that it also helps poor countries learn state-of-the-art technologies developed in other countries. For instance, these countries like Mexico may not know the newest technology or how to use the newest technology to build the car. But because the Ford Company opens a factory over there, the labor can learn how to produce car. And because of this reason, there are too many benefits for, especially for the poor countries. Many economists advise governments in less developed economies advocate policies that encourage investment from abroad. And even for that, we have two important, even more important international organizations. The first one is World Bank, and the second one is International Monetary Fund.